Tanse, I'm Krisanachkate. Welcome to APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. According to a new Statistics Canada report, Indigenous children who grow up in government care experience poor health and socio-economic outcomes later in life compared to children who were never in care. StatsCan says Indigenous children in provincial care suffer higher rates of disability, lower self-rated health levels, and are more likely to experience homelessness and meet basic household needs, and have a lower chance of graduating high school. StatsCan says despite the closure of residential schools and the end of the 60 Scoop, family separation continues to happen at a disproportionately high rate in Indigenous communities. According to 2021 census data, 53.8% of children in care are Indigenous, but only account for 7.7% of the overall population of children in Canada. In Saskatchewan, a new youth care home has recently opened in Regina, offering supports to teenagers with mental health and addictions challenges.
The cultural and traditions that they practice will be honored here, and we have staff who are experienced in that area, so all that will happen.
Last Thursday marked the grand opening with an official ribbon-cutting ceremony, but the facility is already open and providing care. The center can accommodate 5 young people between the ages of 12 and 18. It's named the Joe and Irene Youth Home after the Métis parents of the executive director. The center provides 24/7 support, and youth can stay from 1 month up to a year. The province is providing funding of $800,000. It is an Indigenous-run home intended for Indigenous youth. The home is intended to provide a safe environment to help young people transition back to their families. The federal government has recently settled more than a dozen agricultural benefit claims with Saskatchewan First Nations. CTV's John Flatters has more on the historic agreement and a warning to chiefs from one FSIN senator.
Of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Gary Anandasangari was at Wanuskewin Heritage Park Friday, joined by the leadership of more than a dozen Saskatchewan First Nations.
We have an opportunity today as a country and as a people to make sure that we reset the relationship for the next generation.
The federal government today announcing the settlement of agricultural benefit claims with 14 First Nations. These claims are related to treaty promises by Canada to provide plows, seeds, and livestock to facilitate First Nation economic development, which went unfulfilled.
We have resolved a number of what's called agricultural benefit claims through the specific claims process, totaling $1.72 billion just this week alone.
Chiefs say they have plans to make sure those funds are available for future generations too.
A priority for our community is to provide a forward vision on how we will invest the settlement. We will prioritize our capital needs, our housing, our youth, our elders, and our collective individual benefits.
But not everyone was in favor of the settlement. Senator Saul Sanderson warned of the fine print associated with this agreement.
The funding that's committed up to now and will be committed for the future should be in the form of compensation agreements, not settlement agreements that's terminating our terms of treaty and our benefits.
The minister responded by saying it's far from a perfect process.
This didn't happen overnight. This happened after, in some cases, decades of work. And it is something where we have mutually agreed to where we are. Nobody's extinguishing any rights under treaty. That is not the intention.
In addition, Cumberland House Cree Nation and the federal government reached a land claim settlement agreement worth around $570 million. John Flatters, CTV News, Saskatoon.
3 Inuit women have filed a class action lawsuit against the Northwest Company, alleging they misappropriated funds through the Federal Nutrition North subsidy. APTN Sarah Bettens has more.
The former commissioner of Nunavut, a film producer, and an artist are 3 Inuit women launching a legal challenge against the Northwest Company. A statement of claim filed to the Manitoba Court of King's Bench on February 5th alleges the Northwest Company misused the Nutrition North Canada subsidy and, quote, unlawfully retained millions of dollars of funding received through the program. Lawyer Tim Dixon represents the plaintiffs.
These courageous individuals are very active in their communities and have been very concerned with food insecurity in the North. They all experience it themselves. They see their community members experiencing it.
Nutrition North Canada was launched in 2011 to make healthy foods more affordable for Northerners. The subsidy is given to Northern retailers, who are supposed to pass it on to the consumer through reduced prices.
What that means is lower the ultimate price by 100% of the amount of the subsidy.
But the suit alleges that the Northwest Company, quote, retained significant portions of the subsidy as profit to the detriment of class members, unquote. Dixon says Northern residents have expressed concerns about the subsidy for years.
But no one's really been able to know until there was an econometric study published in 2023 that looked at the increase in the subsidy and how much of that was being passed through to consumers by lowering prices, and it found that not all of it was.
And while the exact amount is unconfirmed, the suit alleges the NWC, quote, may have unlawfully retained approximately $21.6 million and $30.8 million annually in funding intended to benefit the class members, unquote. The lawsuit claims Northwest received more than $163 million from the subsidy between 2018 and 2021. The suit seeks an order demanding the Northwest Company return the allegedly misappropriated funds to Northern residents.
We are hoping that it is part of the conversation that has been going on about food insecurity in the North, about the federal government's role in helping to mitigate these very high prices for nutritious foods in the North, and ultimately about improving the Nutrition North program.
In October 2024, then Federal Minister of Northern Affairs, Dan Vandel, announced an external review of Nutrition North Canada that would be launched in 2025. APTN has reached out to Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada requesting an update. A statement sent to APTN from Brigitte Bourgoin, the Northwest Company's Director of Communications and Public Relations, says, quote, the Northwest Company cannot respond directly to specific allegations out of respect for the legal process. However, we can state with full confidence that the Northwest Company meets all Nutrition North Canada program requirements. It adds that, quote, while the NNC program partially offsets the costs of bringing food to the North on its own, it is not enough. Cost drivers, such as lack of infrastructure, the high cost of materials, operations, and inflation all have an impact on food prices, unquote. A statement of defense has not been filed, and none of the allegations have been proven in court. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
We have to take a quick 3-minute break, but when we'll be right back with more stories. Stay with us. staying with us. A partnership born out of the pandemic is helping connect Indigenous people with healthy cultural food and their community at the same time.
1/3 of food bank clients of Harvest are self-identified Indigenous, and so we understood that as we come out of the pandemic, we just can't continue to do things in the same old way.
The building at 563 Notre Dame will house Ashishikan, which is the Cree Ojibwe word for to put out an offering. The space is a collaboration between the Mama Wichita Center and Harvest Manitoba. When the site opens early next year, it will be a drop-in center and provide training and cultural programs, and will also be a place for people to get groceries for free.
The exciting thing about it, it's going to be set up like a grocery store. So it's really the idea of like a food bank where instead of getting a box that you may or may need some of those contacts, you can select what you need for your family.
The $14 million construction project has several funding partners, including all 3 levels of government. Each weekday this month, T.R. Wheatley has introduced you to a knowledge carrier who brings you a phrase of the day. Our goal at APTN is to bring you to the roots of Indigenous languages. Today we take you to Daga Mohawk territory, where Laura Morris is a first language instructor of Ganya Geha, also known as Mohawk.
Ganya Geha name is Ganya Latokwas, which means picking leaves out of the water. My English name is Laura Morris. I'm originally from Akwesasne. I've been living in Tandanaga for 5 years now. There is the alphabets now for Ganya Geha language. In the consonants, depending on dialect, for example, the R in Akwesasne, we pronounce it as a L. The letter G is a K for us. The phrase is, come, let's sit together. God's Dede Wadelatneka. God's Dede Wadelatneka. God's is come. Dede, you and I. Dewa, us. Latneka, together. Ga, sit. I do work with the children a little bit. And there is this one song that I really like. I'm not a singer, but for some reason that song stuck with me. So, and that word is in there. It has more meaning to us when we sing it and when we say it in our language. I love my grandmother, I love my mother, I love my older sister. Let's all sit together. So it could kind of mean in a spiritual sense and in a physical sense. Come, let's sit together. God's the Wadelatneka.
Thank you, Laura, as well as the Language and Cultural Center in Tyandanega for the teaching. Niawo. To hear the other phrases of the day for February, check out our website at aptnnews.ca/mother tongue teachings. We now want to tell you about last week's web poll results. Our first question we asked, considering previous calls to boycott Canada Day, has your opinion of Canada changed in light of the recent events in the United States? 36% said yes, 50% voted no, and 14% were unsure. Our second question we asked, do you think the Canadian government's funding cuts will hinder efforts to search for unmarked graves at former residential school sites? An overwhelming yes at 73%, 18% voted no, and 9% were unsure. And our last web poll question we asked, are you aware of the types of services covered under Jordan's Principle? 38% voted yes and 62% voted no. Thank you to everyone who voted. We'll have a new list of web poll questions posted soon. The results are in for what Indigenous youth had to say about culture, language, and education. That interview when we come back. Starting on the east, Charlottetown -4, Halifax, Sun, and -1. The Grand River -11, Kuujjuaq -13. Saquonay -8, Gaspé -1. Sarnia -3, London, Sun, and -5. Sudbury -4, Thunder Bay -3. -12 in God's Lake, Churchill -14. Dauphin -5, Gimli -11. Yorkton -1, Saskatoon -7. Stony Rapids -24, Buffalo Narrows, Sun, and -9. High Level -6, Fort McMurray -4. Medicine Hat 9, Calgary 10. 12 in Kamloops, Campbell River 9. Fan Spit 9, Smithers 6. Watson Lake -2, Mayo -1. -15 in Wati, Wrigley -14. Sax Harbor -28, Palatuk same temperature. Chesterfield -30, Whale Cove -30. And Iqaluit -19, Aglulik -30. A national organization led by Indigenous youth has recently released the findings of one of the largest Indigenous youth-led research initiatives in Canada. Indigenous Youth Roots spoke with more than 1,100 Indigenous youth for its 2024 Reconciliation Barometer. For more on what the youth had to say about things like culture, language, and education, our Dennis Ward recently spoke with Megan Lewis, the Indigenous Youth Roots Director of the Centre for Indigenous Policy and Research. Here's that interview.
Megan, thanks so much for being with us here. Can you tell us about the Indigenous Youth Reconciliation Barometer and why it's so critical to hear from the youth?
Of course, yeah. So the Indigenous Youth Reconciliation Barometer is one of the largest youth-focused research projects to date. So it's really a comprehensive look at how Indigenous youth envision their futures and what they're ready to leave in the past. So we engaged with 1,125 Indigenous youth from coast to coast to coast and really listened to youth express that they require systemic policy change and advocacy that promotes healing and wellness within their communities. And essentially it was a project that came from youth telling us that they were kind of looking to define their futures and share it with a wider audience and ready for us to support them in advocating for that change.
Aside from that, I guess, what were some of the things that stuck out from for you from what the youth had to say?
Yeah, there was so much. So one of the things that always comes to mind is across the many conversations that we had with youth, a lot of them are still quite committed to believing that reconciliation is really important. However, we compared a stat from 2019 when the first barometer happened, and at that time, about 75% of youth, of Indigenous youth participated, felt that reconciliation was possible, and there was actually quite a significant decrease this time to about 50%. And despite youth believing that reconciliation is important, we kind of noticed that youth are leaning much more heavily on their communities, and they're not waiting any longer for others to catch up. They're ready to kind of push forward and advocate for that change themselves.
Was there anything that was sticking out in terms of why the numbers there on reconciliation dropped so much?
I think a lot of youth really spoke to the fact that across their generations in their communities, their families, their parents, their elders, chiefs, and communities have been saying the same thing for decades. They already know what the solutions are. Communities know what they need best. And they're tired of kind of waiting for action to be taken by governments. And so youth are really seeing that advocacy work really increase in their communities, and they're really dedicating that time to connecting with each other. The networks that youth are building across communities, across nations, from coast to coast, is really something that we saw come through across all themes that we spoke to.
You know, I guess if the youth know what needs to happen, what are some of the barriers they're facing in trying to achieve their goals?
Yeah, it's a great question. When we spoke to a lot of youth, there were most of the barriers, of course, that we heard were as a result of colonization. I'm sure nobody's surprised by that. A lot of youth spoke to, I'll just reference the theme of education and meaningful work, a lack of access to education in particular, youth having to leave their communities when they don't want to. I think that's an important kind of context piece. Not enough funding for education, workplaces not being flexible enough for them to still support their communities or access culture, language and wellness, when we're talking about those themes, not having a way to start learning language in particular if they've had to leave their communities. So there's a lot of those particular examples that are really embedded in communities, and youth are trying to find ways to connect with elders and folks who are doing that work and have been doing that work in order to kind of reach those futures that they spoke to so clearly and so eloquently throughout the report.
As you mentioned, Megan, there was a youth barometer back in 2019. A lot's gone on since then, a whole global pandemic for one. Were there any other major changes in how the youth were feeling aside from their thoughts on reconciliation?
Mm-hmm. Another important kind of change that we saw that was really meaningful, and again, I think speaks to that important connection to culture, was language. More youth are interested and committed to learning their language, so there was quite an increase in youth interested and committed to learning their language, and that's kind of across the board. Obviously, when you get more specific into which youth we spoke to, that does shift a little bit, but we're seeing more youth connected to that. In addition, something that was also really interesting is back in 2019, one of the key motivators for Indigenous youth was financial gain and financial kind of comfort and sustainability. And this time around, it was more about supporting family and community. And again, I think that speaks to the fact that youth are seeing that the people that have their backs the most are their families, their community, and their networks. And all of those other things that are important, comfort, basic needs, financial gain, are still there. Mm-hmm. But in order to achieve those, the people that we're leaning on the most and that we saw across all of those conversations really are community, because those are the folks that are kind of always going to be there and have our backs no matter what those kind of barriers are.
I guess just quickly here, Megan, this was a pretty large sample size of opinions. How do you turn it into policies and programs and change mindsets to help the youth achieve these goals?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the most important things for us is that we really wanted this research to not just sit on a shelf. So if you read the report, you'll notice it's quite long. It's about 194 pages, and we didn't want the data to just be numbers. So you'll see the stories shared, and that's something that's really connected to Indigenous communities, is telling those stories, because the numbers are actually people. We talked to these youth over the past year and a half, and so part of what we're hoping when we talk to folks like yourself, and we talk to governments who are hopefully going to hear these stories and want to make a change, is that they see that those numbers and these statistics are actually connected to people. And so when you hear the recommendations that we made in the report, and also the more specific sector-specific recommendations we're going to be creating as well, that you're actually going to be impacting and changing real lives. And we have a really strong responsibility to the youth to continue to carry forward this work. So it doesn't stop here. The report's finished, but we have a lot of work to continue to do alongside youth to ensure that we are honoring their voices and honoring the change that we hope to see, and that they're already doing such strong leadership to make sure it takes place.
Well, good stuff, Megan. Good work. Appreciate you taking some time to talk to us about it here today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
The first Indigenous woman to become a lawyer in Canada has passed away at 89 years of age. Marian Midmore was born in the Pipigisi's First Nation in Saskatchewan in 1936. She attended residential school in the File Hills Colony and graduated at Birtle Residential School. In 1954, she married Ron Midmore, a four-time Grey Cup winner with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. She graduated with a law degree from the University of Manitoba in 1977 and practiced criminal and family law before founding the first all-woman law firm in Winnipeg. Midmore helped start the National Indian Council, a forerunner of the Assembly of First Nations. She also helped start the Winnipeg Friendship Centre and the Indigenous Bar Association of Canada. She was awarded the Order of Canada in 1985. Aaron Midmore is survived by her sons Glenn, Neil, and Jim, and 3 grandchildren. And that's your daytime newscast for this Monday, February 24th. We're back in a few hours with your evening newscast. Make sure to join us then. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next day.